Hello and welcome to the Six Sales podcast. This is Mike Nicholson from Six Sales. Today we're going to be speaking to Lucy Alexander, who is the Director of Insights and Analytics at the Financial Times. Lucy, how are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me
Good.
here.
So lovely to see you again, albeit it does make me feel incredibly old because we worked together when you were a graduate at the Telegraph and I was already a few years into my career, should we say. So meeting you as Director of Insights and Analytics at the Financial Times makes me feel like I must be like 100 at least.
Yeah, it is.
So
it's
thanks for
lovely
that.
to see you. You look unchanged,
Yeah,
I should say.
Sure.
But yeah, it was a while back actually. Yeah, it feels a few careers ago for me, or at least
It does, a couple of lifetimes.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything was in black and white back then, wasn't it?
It
Did we have
actually,
colour?
it was,
Yeah.
fittingly.
Yeah.
It was all in black and white. And actually, it was in the time of, I used to get dressed up in pencil skirts and heels, I think, to attend the office and things like that. Just the world has shifted a little, I think.
Somewhat, yeah. Converse now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the way forward.
It is.
So give us a bit of a flavour of your career to date then. Obviously Telegraph in 2009, that was your first job, right? That was your graduate trainee programme. So give us a bit of a brief overview of your career to date that's led you to the FT.
Yeah, so that's right. I started in 2009 on a graduate traineeship, and I was very lucky to get that job, to be honest, because it was in the middle of the credit crunch. And I think a lot of the final year students I was with, we were all thinking, okay, well, perhaps unemployment looms forever. So I was very grateful for that. It was an interesting apprenticeship in terms of telling me mostly what I didn't want to do as a later stage. It was a lot of things which I immediately realised I'd be awful at. But it was actually at the Telegraph that I started to get a flavour of maybe what I might be good at, or at least what I might be interested in. Because I met a really fantastic woman who was in charge of giving insight to senior people within editorial. I thought that was amazing and sort of magic.
Who was that?
I actually can't remember her name, which is so terrible about it. Yeah. But I can remember every detail about her down to, what she looked like exactly and this spreadsheet. But yeah.
Wasn't Lara, was it?
I don't think it was, no.
Okay.
I will try and rack our brains later. But I thought she was phenomenal, and I occasionally was allowed to tag along and look at this spreadsheet. So as a result of that, I decided that might be the direction I should move to, and I went to Channel 4, and I got the sort of nearest I could to what I thought she was doing, which was within research. Another great learning experience. I mean, I think also like the first 8 years of my career were all like learning and doing things wrong a lot of the time, and really being confronted very harshly with my own limitations. And like gradually, you sort of build up expertise as you go along. So I left Channel 4, I went to Burberry. I left Burberry and I went to ASOS, and eventually I ended up at the Financial Times, where I've been for 8 years now, very, very happily.
Excellent. So 15 years or so of career to date. What are you most proud of so far?
I think what I'm most proud of in a professional sense is probably the work that we've done at the Financial Times. And I say we because, it is a very collegiate environment. Everyone is chipping in for the same goals. And definitely where it comes to the team that I manage, it's a team of stars. So it's a pleasure to work with them on these projects and kind of see these things realised. But I think what has been a source of pride has been that we've got a team that has long tenure, a team that is able to kind of do a lot of interesting work. It's highly varied. I think you see a lot of analytics teams who are, mostly doing the same thing, or doing kind of things within a relatively narrow sort of range. And actually, I think there's a lot of variety in what we do, and it keeps it very exciting and interesting. So.
Does that long tenure tend to spread across the whole of the Financial Times, or is it just in your team? Because I'd imagine if you're like in media or press or business or whatever, it's kind of you've arrived, right? Like this is, where do we go after the FT? Like,
yeah, well, that is how it still feels to me every day, for sure. And I think, it was a very very lovely environment to work in for a lot of reasons. I think, you get a fair amount of satisfaction from working somewhere which has such high quality kind of imbued within it. The way of working is also very, very nice. And I think sometimes that doesn't always align. So you get companies that you think, right, we're doing really good thing here. It feels there's a great degree of satisfaction working there. But unfortunately, the culture doesn't quite match. But at the FT, the culture really matches. And so no one really wants to leave because, you've got the best of both worlds there. You're proud to work for the organisation, but also you don't dread going in at all.
So it's not a very corporate atmosphere then, like environment?
It's interesting you say that, because actually the two companies that I've most enjoyed working with, I wouldn't describe as corporate, but what I would say is they are well run along corporate lines. I've had a lot of respect for the structure and the hierarchy of the company, and I've appreciated in some ways the slightly corporate feel, and perhaps that's just me, but I like to see that a company is a business and has kind of a clear strategy and direction, and so elements of what I think is kind of a corporate environment I quite appreciate. So in that sense, it doesn't feel corporate on the ground. Like when you're doing your day-to-day work, you can be quite casual, it's very friendly, it's quite relaxed in many ways, but at the same time you never think this is dysfunctional at all, or this is a kind of startup environment. It doesn't feel like that to me. Not to say startups are dysfunctional, I should just mention.
So it could be easy to like pigeonhole any title, I guess, but with the FT, it could be like the city gent with his bowler hat and there's impossibly shiny shoes and his umbrella with the FT under his arm. And you when you sort of think, I don't know, I've just imagined something out of Mary Poppins or something, I'm not sure, but if you take that idea of that kind of reader, it would be easy to think, well, that must be what they behave like internally, but it's not like that, right? It's a lot sort of more maybe fun and friendly and
yeah, it is. I find it both fun and friendly. Definitely friendly. There's very little, bad behaviour within the working day that you really feel like, ow, that hurt. That was an unpleasant experience. This interesting, the picture that you've got of the FT reader, because
I know it isn't that, by the way. I was
I know.
hamming it up.
I understand, and I think, even 10 years ago, pre-pandemic, there was a lot more of that. The city was probably much fuller on a day-to-day basis than it currently is. And I think we are very associated with that in many ways. It's really important. In fact, it's central to everything that we do, to try and make sure that we do understand who our reader is and we don't fall into the trap of defining them as kind of these people who are quite alien to us. It's really important that we remember that actually they're probably people who are very, very similar to us in many ways, but not us, and we've got to understand how we can try and make the product as good as possible without either over-identifying with our audience or thinking of them as a complete other that we could just never understand. Keeping our audience front of mind all the time is really important to us.
Well, that's one of the questions I had for you. I was going to broach later, but since you brought it up, so I know you speak about you are not your customer. So how do you go about kind of figuring out who your customer is and not looking at it as a sample size of one and thinking, they're probably like us? Because I think that everyone tends to do that. It's human nature, isn't it, to think that people are probably quite like us and we know what they want. And how do you use data to make sure that you understand who they are really and what they actually want versus what you think they might want?
You're absolutely right to say it's human nature. The tendency to want to optimize for your own experience is quite overwhelming. So especially with product development, for example, just as an example, you want to make tweaks and refine things according to how you might find them usable. And it's so essential that you actually remind yourself that it isn't you at the end of the day who is the only recipient of this wonderful product. So we've got a huge array of ways in which we try and keep the customer close. Obviously, literally we speak to customers all the time and we ask their opinion on things. And we use that information as a really important starting point for how we think about optimization and changes to the product. We do that on a small scale, so in focus groups and individually, and then we also do that obviously on a large scale, and that's more when my team come in, is we try and understand our customers through the wonderful data that we hold and the insights that we're able to gather through mechanisms like research and feedback.
Okay, so a day in the life of Lucy then. What keeps you busy as a Director of Insights and Analytics? Who are your customers, internal and external? What's your day-to-day role look like?
It's a great question, and I will say again, it's quite varied, which is part of the attraction, definitely. But my stakeholders are primarily senior leaders within the company, but all across the company. So my team technically serves absolutely everyone. We have a completely broad remit. We're a centralized team, so there's no part of the FT that we are completely hands off from,
Okay.
which is wonderful because, again, it just means that we have a very unusually broad insight into what the company as a whole is doing. Even from more junior analysts are able to understand things that relate to multiple different departments in a way which is simply not possible for the majority of the company. So I've got 4 teams that I run, and at different times they occupy different amounts of my day in terms of managing what their priorities are and the kind of initiatives that we're working on together, down to team management things, which I also love. So making sure that the teams are not overworked, making sure that they have enough bandwidth to kind of enjoy their lives, making sure that we're keeping that balance correct, also making sure that they're motivated in a way that appeals to them personally. Those are all challenges that we try and address head on, and my day is spent doing those things, as well as, of course, the normal sort of emailing, meetings, those things.
Calendar management, holidays,
calendar management, sickness. Precisely. Yes, indeed. Exactly.
So you when I think of the FT, I think of possibly one of the most trusted publications in the world, I would say. I can't remember of any scandal where you may have damaged that in any way, or excellence in business, and that's across the board as well, right? You've got amazing titles like the New York Times and the Washington Post, but they don't transfer globally as well as the FT. So pretty much wherever you go in the world, you're going to recognise the pink brand, should we say?
Yeah.
So trust is a really, really big part of what you do, and obviously data and analytics is what you do. So I guess my question is, can you use data and analytics to measure the trust and the impact of that trust, whether that be to your advertising clients, whether that be within your readership? How do you quantify trust? Because I don't think, if I could have 100 people sit where you are sitting and say, do you think the FT is a trusted brand? And they all go, absolutely yes. Like you just feel it, right? But how do you measure it? How do you use data and analytics to know that and perhaps even optimize it?
Yeah, what an interesting question. I think you're right to say that there is a lot of trust in the FT, and I'll talk about the kind of the trust and how that impacts our lives, particularly in the analytics function in a moment, because it's really central to the way that we think about things. But that trust is created primarily through, I guess, 2 routes, which are church and state at the FT. So one is solid running of the commercial side of the business, not doing anything at all dodgy, obviously. And then the other side is this gold standard journalism, where everything is highly thoughtful, where we're really aiming for a very objective viewpoint, which is rooted in data, and all of these attributes combined together to give a kind of a whole, which is something which is trustworthy in a world where there is tremendous disinformation. And so it increasingly becomes this sort of safe haven of place you can go to find as close to the reality of the situation as you possibly can. And I think given the last few years especially, that's become extremely important, like you say. So the kind of conceptual sense of trust is massive, actually. What you were saying, we all kind of feel it, and that is quite hard to measure, I would say. And it does have direct world implications, for example, in advertising, as you mentioned. We can obviously ask the market through forums like research surveys, similar types of thing, where we're directly asking, what is the level of trustworthiness that you feel about the brand, and would you, tools like NPS, would you recommend the brand to somebody else, all of those kind of things. So we can do that, and that is pretty easy, to be honest, to measure and to disseminate around the company, and that is something that, of course, we do. There are lots of other ways in which it could be measured, but perhaps it's harder to. So, for example, for advertising sales, in an environment where the advertising market is pretty challenging, the FTE typically holds up very well. So these are ways in which we can manage to measure a little bit like what our difference is.
You mean how solid is your place on the media plan?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So those are types of ways. But I think, again, we receive through social media, through our comments online, through customer care, through all of these different routes, tremendous volume of inbound feedback all the time. It's very, very easy for us to tell where readers are feeling, all sorts of different emotions. We really get that sentiment very clearly. So that's another amazing route for us to kind of listen to our listeners and make sure that things are being kept on track. But I think at core of the sort of central to this trust question is, can the FT be left to take these good decisions about, you know, what articles should be written, how the articles come across, where they're published, all of these things, like, can it do its job? And it does its job over and over again.
Okay.
Really effectively.
So just leading into that then, and going in a little bit more detail, if I may, is
sure.
The data and analytics that you work across. You already mentioned that you're pretty much across the whole business in one way or another, and it's all very joined up, which sounds awesome. And actually, I would have expected that from the outside. It feels like that, if that makes sense. But can you give us some specific use cases on how your data and analytics might support the advertising side of the business? Let's say the subscription side of the business, the distribution side of the business, you know, all of the different sort of sides of the business, and how you interact with them, and how your data supports decision making and that sort of pursuit of excellence in each of those departments.
Yeah, brilliant. So let me go back a little bit as well, because although I manage a centralized function, we have embedded analysts throughout the company who kind of sit within those different departments and act as a member of the team. So their heart is split between the team that they sit in and their analytics, you know, their analytics side. There are also teams which sit in a sort of embedded function as well, and we call them federated teams. So a team like advertising is a great example. They have a phenomenal analytics team that they use, who are our kind of sister brother team, and we're extremely close in what we do. What that team enables is not only for them just to really, really thoroughly understand their business, you know, inside and out, which I think is the starting point for every kind of analytics and reporting function. You really want to understand what you're doing, but also it really enables them to kind of keep competitive. So I always feel that our advertising teams are right at the cutting edge of what's being done. There's a lot of really innovative uses of data which allow them to stay.
Can you give us any examples, or is it all like classified?
I'm actually just wondering if I can.
Don't worry.
I feel like I'm going to be in trouble if I do, but the data and the management of data in a kind of ethical and appropriate way, but within a commercial context, is just such a hot thing. And all competitors are wanting to use their first party data in a way which really gives an advantage, especially in the world of kind of cookies demising. And so I think it's all within those kind of spaces that we're really doing some very interesting things there.
So if I invent, rather than you give away any sort of state secrets, if I invent a situation, hypothetical situation, perhaps you could tell me how you might then use that data in order to kind of support each of the departments, if indeed that's how it works. So let's just say that you had a data point that the amount of inbound social comments and dwell time on US election content seems to be disproportionately high for the time of year and how close it is. So what would you do with that information? How could that help support the advertising team? How could it help the distribution team? How could it help the data team itself? You know, like how would you disseminate that information across and use it, if that's the right word, to support all of your different departments?
Perhaps I'll take a higher view of that than. Sorry to
always my question was rubbish.
No, it was a great question. I want to just turn it on its head a little bit to say, it's not really so much as how that data, you're describing that in a way which is almost like the data is the starting point. How we like to think about it at the FT is that we are there to enable really, really good decisions to be made by those parts of the company that know exactly their job. So the subscription team, the advertising team, all of those individual teams, including editorial, they know their world inside and out. They have phenomenal questions and we have the means to answer them. So if, for example, we had a massive amount of engagement with our US election content, it would be very likely that the editorial team would firstly have anticipated that. It would be surprising if it was an amazing brand new piece of information to them. But let's just say we had this phenomenal spike and anomaly came in. We would be there to help them form their strategy and also to guide them on their next steps. That's sort of exactly how we see ourselves, is how do we help them make that best next step. as well as sitting at a higher level and trying to answer the bigger business questions that we receive from the likes of the board and the senior management group.
Okay. And would that then perhaps dovetail, would it be a siloed approach where advertising might get that data independently, know their business inside and out, and think, okay, well that seems to be really a hot topic at the moment, so maybe we should be talking to our advertising clients that are of American born, or that have an interest around this particular content? Or could it be that editorial strategy is we're going to produce more of this content because people seem to like it, which means that advertising are now tipped off that there's going to be more of this content because people seem to like it, which means that they can start having early conversations, or as early as possible, conversations with clients and agencies around what's coming around the corner based on what the actual FT reader wants?
Yeah, because what you're describing there is a sort of level of data maturity that is absolutely what we want, and we have in many ways. What we should have is a level of democracy for our data, in the sense of it's accessible by the right people, because what we don't want to be doing is like a point of failure. We don't want to be a bottleneck and holding all of this information in some sort of really closed off way. Actually, advertising do see their own data completely. Just, I'm not doing anything there. They are in it all the time, as our editorial, as our kind of B2B marketing team, B2C marketing teams. And beyond that, they are then collaborating to think of how they should best sort of design the strategy to incorporate all of this knowledge that they know from the data. So we're not at a kind of foundational stage where we're pushing data out. People are taking the data and they are already, sensitive enough and on top of it enough to know how they then make these next steps. And the idea is that in many ways, we reduce the level of us having to really be involved in the kind of nitty gritty of it, to being right at the top of those conversations where we're taking a much more kind of broad view of how it all sits together.
Okay. And moving to subscriptions, do you use data to inform at what point the paywall comes in? Is it individualized to the person, or is it a blanket, you get 3 and then you have to pay?
We are, yes, it's really interesting, this space, and actually it's an area that I love the most. So we are a subscription business, so fundamentally we have a kind of policy whereby you pay to access the content of the FT, but there are allowances made for various different things actually, and you can read enough content, we hope, to get a good sense of what the brand is before you have to pay for it. Understanding exactly where that comes in is really interesting. That's actually a phenomenally interesting part of what I do personally. And actually all of our competitors, anyone who runs a subscription business, is and should be playing in quite a detailed way in that space. In terms of the level of personalization, it's interesting, but that's what we're all aiming to do, is to get exactly the right offer to the right person at the right time. And I would say that probably everyone is on a journey there, rather than wallowing in the joy that is being absolutely perfect there. It's this kind of, the degree of personalization of offers and things like that really relies on having quite a lot of different products to offer people, or combinations of products and things like that. At the FT we have sort of perhaps more narrower product set than that, so tends to be relatively similar, but we're on that journey and we're moving along that route now. It's an area of great opportunity, I think, to get that right.
Where do you think it'll eventually go? Do you think it'll be where you draw the line in the sand at an individual level based on, okay, we'll give this person 4 articles, let's say, I'm just making numbers up, because we know that typically they're not going to pay, or not yet anyway, because they seem to push their allowance every month and then go away again. And so they might be in a bucket of as regular as you can be without subscribing, and that might be more valuable to advertisers, let's say, because we know that they like the content, but just not quite enough to pay for it yet for whatever reason.
Those are exactly the questions you have to ask, because the logical next step from that is, okay, what is the transaction that can be done whereby that person isn't getting exactly as much as they want for free? How do we try and enable that to be a commercial benefit to us as well? We don't want to ultimately be satisfying people's entire consumption just through free access. We want to make sure that there is a compelling reason why you would want to engage further with the the brand. We want people to be reading a lot at the FT, and so finding that balance is absolutely right, and trying to work out what the product is that might appeal to that particular type of person. You know, that is many people's entire jobs to think about those kind of questions in detail, and it will continue to evolve. We've got a tremendously disrupted space with news media. There are many companies giving their news away totally for free to the consumer, paid for by advertising. And we've also got on the horizon things like large language models and what Google is doing potentially with its just search results. So we're always keeping an eye on what's going on in the broader kind of the ecosystem, the digital ecosystem, to try and see where the next kind of interesting opportunity / nightmarish challenges coming from. You got to keep on your toes there a little bit.
Yeah, which leads us nicely into AI. Of course, you'll be looking at AI and how it can help and augment everything that your brilliant people do. But how much of it is reality today? How much is AI actually embedded in your day-to-day world and helping today? And how much of it is this will be good in the future? Like, what does that look like at the FT? Are you using it a lot today?
Yeah, I would say we are using it quite a bit. Actually, we have quite a lot of access to tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, and I don't know if you saw in the press, but also we are now in a relationship with OpenAI in the sense that they are going to have access to our archive. All of these things are very, very exciting, and we have been given a lot of freedom to kind of play around and experiment to see how it can produce efficiencies in our individual workflows, as well as kind of on a team level and a department level. So all of that is great, and I do think to varying degrees it's quite embedded already within some of our practices. I would say there's an enormous way to go in every possible sense. Like, we hardly know what the real potential of this is for us all. But one thing I do think is really clear is that although I personally don't believe AI is coming for our jobs now, people using AI in their workflows will be coming for our jobs if we don't start doing that. So I think it's incumbent on us really to embrace this technology and see how we can use it, as well as, of course, having a reasonable degree of healthy kind of skepticism and, just keeping a kind of serious eye on it, because I think it's an emerging area which the implications of it are probably not fully realised.
Yeah, it's interesting that the FT have collabed with the OpenAI, because it seems that there's two schools of thought, and perhaps the larger school of thought is we don't want AI crawling our content and taking it and using it without us having any sort of value out of it.
Yeah.
You've kind of gone the other way. I don't know if you can talk to that at all. In my own experience, I use ChatGPT. I find it not so good at creating content, but really good at finding content. So if I give it a prompt, I trained my own version of it and say, I want articles that have been written in the last month about media and advertising and attention, and it goes off and finds them. But even in the 6 months I've been doing that, I've seen that slowly but surely the sites where you can find that information have blocked access, and so it's had an ever dwindling audience of sites that it can sort of derive that information from, which I think is a fear of having people's IP stolen and nothing coming back. But you've kind of gone the other way, so I don't know if you can talk to that at all. Or
well, let me say that I think as a kind of company decision, it's so far above my pay grade. somewhat not aware actually of a lot of kind of core details behind it. But from my own perspective, other companies, for example, the New York Times, currently involved in litigation, I think, in this area. And it does seem to be that there is tremendous degree of uncertainty around the legal position of various things. I feel like the case law is in some ways being written now. And some companies have started to take a stance, including us, where we've got more of a kind of collaborative viewpoint, maybe. I think that the degree of greyness within this area of what is and isn't acceptable from either a legal standpoint, or also like what can be done really to prevent it technically, because some of these earlier models just scraped the internet really without asking permission. No one even really knew it was happening, or the vast majority, particularly of smaller companies, are relatively powerless to stop it from doing that from a technical perspective. The question of whether they should be allowing this and whether this is the right thing for us all to be doing is just a hugely powerful ethical question.
Yeah.
It seems to
They
me,
took the view that we'll ask for forgiveness rather than permission, and then we'll talk about it later, right?
Yeah, and also I think, what constitutes intellectual property in this way is interesting. If you're selling subscriptions, you are giving it to somebody to enjoy in a relatively free way. If I sell you a subscription to the FT, you could read all of the FT. You're not limited to just reading one thing. So there are all kinds of very, very interesting questions that come up about it. And I personally am not sort of senior enough to really be involved in those conversations, but I do think it's absolutely one to watch, and it will continue to be evolving in this space, and we'll see what other people decide to do as well.
Okay.
It will have a big impact, the outcome of these tentative early lawsuits, as well as I'm sure governments, legislators will have to at a certain point really grapple with these issues in a bigger way than they are currently.
Okay. And what's on your roadmap for the next 12 months? What's going to keep you busy? What are you most excited about?
I'm very excited about sort of the impact of tooling that will happen on my team in particular. We're going through a bit of a phase of rebuilding our foundations in terms of tools, so that's wonderful to see. It's going to really improve what we can do, just how easy things are to do, which will be a great efficiency for us. So that's thrilling, because it's the realization of a few years' work, kind of trying to steer everything in the direction that you think is the right way to do it. I'm excited from a perspective of this is a very big year for democracy for us all, us in particular, the world in general. And so the FT is wonderfully placed to thrive in those conditions, in as much as we have an important voice on these massive topics. November is going to be a big month in news terms. We don't even know where our own election is going to be. So there's all of this big uncertainty, some of it obviously with far more implication than others on world events. So it's an exciting time to be working in news media, that's for sure.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, 15 years later, it was lovely to see you again.
Yeah, lovely.
Thank you so much for being on 6 Hours podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, lovely to speak to you too. Thanks for having me.